Harvard Divinity School.
The Climate of Compassion for All Beings. October 18th, 2021.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for another weather report, the climate of compassion for all beings, with the venerable Buddhist scholar Janet Gyatso and our respondent, theologian Stephanie Paulsell, both beloved professors at the Harvard Divinity School. And Brian Kurbis of Theosophy has graced us once again with a tea ceremony to slow our minds and open our hearts to this moment in shadow and light. I'm Terry Tempest Williams, and on behalf of the Harvard Divinity School, the Center for the Study of World Religions, Religion and Public Life, and the Planetary Health Alliance, in partnership with the Constellation Project, we welcome you to another conversation of bearing witness to this climate of now. And the act of bearing witness is what binds these conversations together. Personal accounts of what it means to be awake, alive, and engaged in the midst of a capricious climate, recognizing that each of us holds an essential piece, a tessera, to this mosaic of deep cultural changes, with the gifts that are ours. We began with fire in the American West, a burning testament to change and the politics of both Northern and Southern California in climate chaos, heightened by poor forest management and the economic and political divides in the state. It created a perfect firestorm in the midst of drought and extreme temperatures. Filmmaker Lucy Walker bore witness to the complexity of climate through her documentary art form. We then focused on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, the melting ice thawing the permafrost, rising seas eroding cliffs where Gwich'in fire camps collapsed into the waters, destabilizing native communities, villages, and yet with ongoing threats to these villages, both human and wild communities. Due to the pressures of fossil fuel development, the Gwich'in and the caribou still are intrinsically bound as one. Remember Indigenous leader Bernadette Dementieff embodied grace through grief and strength as she bore witness to the truth of living at ground zero of climate chaos. And our last weather report looked at the intersectionality of racial and environmental justice through individual actions born out of a commitment to social change on a changing planet. Morgan Curtis has committed 100% of her inherited wealth to supporting Native and Black-led organizations and their land projects. And Bronte Velez illustrated the power of gesture as they melt guns into shovels that can plant trees, transforming the story of racial violence into peaceful acts through the prophetic voice of community. And on Friday, October 8th, approaching a sanctioned Indigenous Day, President Biden and Secretary Holland restored Bears Ears National Monument. I was fortunate enough to be home in Utah and experience the ceremonial circle of gratitude with Native people and non-Native people alike in community on top of Muley Point with an eye toward the long view. It felt like the beginning of sincere reparations from the United States government. And you'll remember Bears Ears, as Eric DeShini shared with us regarding sacred land protection, is always about healing. These are kaleidoscopic visions. With each turn of the wrist, we see another possibility of engagement through witness and daring deeds. Bearing witness is not a passive act, but an act of conscience and consequence. To bear witness is to return with a story. Story is the umbilical cord that binds the past, present, and future. It keeps things known. And those of us who hear that story become accountable for that knowledge which is shared. It becomes the conscience of the community. Tonight's witness and storyteller is Janet Gyatso. She is the Hershey Professor of Buddhist Studies and Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs at the Harvard Divinity School. Gyatso was president of the International Association of Tibetan Studies, and in 2018 was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Her concentration as a Buddhist scholar is on Tibetan and South Asian cultural and intellectual histories, from the blending of religion and science in Tibetan medicine, to sex and gender in Buddhist monasticism, to visionary revelations in Buddhism. Professor Gyatso's landmark books, and I've been fortunate to read many of them, Being Human in a Buddhist World, An Intellectual History of Medicine in Early Modern Tibet, Women of Tibet, Apparitions of the Self, The Secret Autobiographies of a Tibetan Visionary, and In the Mirror of Memory, Reflections on Mindfulness and Remembrance in Indian Tibetan Buddhism. Her current writings focused on the phenomenology of living well with animals and related ethical issues and practices, which she will be sharing with us tonight. Personally, I can tell you we now have 3 cats due to Janet's passionate advocacy on behalf of a deeper relationship to animals. She reminded me that I had abandoned my feline self. And as one of her students, Maisie Luo, has said today, her classes and her teaching offer wisdoms that are transformative, practical and timely in this present world. She's also encouraged me and many of my peers to creatively imagine possibilities with our unique talents that contribute to a more loving and caring world. Maisie brings her dog to class. Janet, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. That was such a wonderful and beautiful introduction. And thank you especially for citing our beloved we're both advising Maisie Lowe, so she's a wonderful student.
And I love that you let Norbu into your class that you're having outside. So what's the weather report where you are tonight?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Terry. It's so wonderful I'm very honored to be part of this whole conversation, and just to say it's been an honor to become your friend and to get to know you, and you are a great inspiration and putting together something amazing here. And I feel very honored to have been asked to be part of it. So thank you so much for asking me. And the weather report, from what I'm talking about, is not very good, actually. It's a very, very, very difficult situation. The plight of animals on our planet today is very bad and getting worse. So it's not in a good place.
And how do you live with that?
Very sadly and very nonetheless, one, has to do whatever one can. And it's been suddenly a kind of calling to me to actually address the issue. It's something I've cared about my whole life, but animals are not my field of study. But recently I felt maybe I can contribute something to what's happening now as a way of trying to address the situation and to find some rays of hope, or maybe find some ways forward. We just have to keep working and trying as long as we can. So, but it's very hard to think about.
I'm interested, as a Buddhist scholar that you are, if you might share a generosity with us of how your path in Buddhism and practice in meditation has brought you to this new place of passion, which is about animal sentience and trying to lessen their suffering. I think it would be helpful for us to think about how your path as a Buddhist and a professor of Buddhist studies has brought you to this place, even in a place of not reconciliation, but able to embrace the grief of what you were finding, as you just articulated.
I thank you, Terry, so much for asking these questions. And I'll say that for myself in my life, ever since I was a very small child, I've always loved animals very deeply. I just have a huge love of all animals. Yes, especially cats, but actually every animal. And I grew up in a Jewish family in Philadelphia, and in a animal loving family. When I came to Buddhism, which was in my college years or a little bit before that, in high school, I was extremely captivated by Buddhism, and I have felt, and I still feel, Buddhism has a hugely deep, truth to it that I really transformed me in many different kinds of ways. And I actually had the fortune when I was, and the luck when I was at Boston University as an undergraduate, of meeting some Tibetan Buddhist teachers for the first time. And I was actually on a path to do something in mathematics or something like that. And I completely changed my field to Buddhist studies, and I started studying Tibetan. And in particular, I went on to University of California and was living out in California for a long time, and had the great fortune to meet some truly amazing and wonderful teachers from the old world, and who had come over as old people, mostly men, but some women as well, who are of that generation, who were just extraordinary human beings. And I was completely overwhelmed and blown away by many aspects of them. But one of the things I did connect with them in a very central idea in Buddhism is compassion for all sentient beings. It's a basic vision of, first of all, wanting to take in look at with clear eyes the truth of life is filled with suffering for all of us. It's a fundamental Buddhist teaching, and for animals in particular, there's a huge amount of compassion, and I, of course, immediately resonated with that. I'll just one little story is when I was in Nepal for the first time, and I visited a place in Kathmandu where it's an old and amazing, beautiful temple, which is a temple to the Bodhisattva Tara, the Bodhisattva of Compassion. I was going to show a picture of it in a moment, but it's a place that's overlaid with many religious traditions. And there also was another religious group there making a live sacrifice of animals to this goddess, which is completely anathema to Buddhist kind of teaching, never live sacrifice. And I just felt like I was going to collapse when I noticed what was happening. Was there's a long line of people carrying these little bunnies and goats and chickens and rabbits, and they were all like sacrificing them and then putting their blood on the statue, and like having to hold onto a fence. And this teacher, this monk who was with us, who I was fortunate to have there, I just looked in his eyes like, what do you do if this is happening, And he didn't blink an eye, he just stared at me back. And I just had to take in the juxtaposition of this incredible, beautiful place and these deities, and the sadness and practice of what was happening. So that really influenced me very deeply. So one second. But I've been working in Buddhist studies my whole life, and I've been teaching Buddhism just in general. But just recently, I'm getting old, and I sort of want to do, I realize this is something I'd like to write on animals, which I've never done. And maybe I can contribute something. And so I just feel like maybe this will be of value. And if it is, it's an offering, if I can do anything.
Just in our conversations, what you are laying forth, I think is so powerful. And I'm wondering, I was going back and looking at Mary Midgley, a British philosopher, in her landmark book, Animals and Why They Matter. And she says the ultimate act of anthropocentrism is to assume that animals don't feel, that they don't have joy, grief, communications. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about human exceptionalism and its effect on animals. And also, I'm interested, Janet, is there a hierarchy in Buddhism, and where do animals fall in that hierarchy? And how is it that you're breaking set with tradition?
That's true. So that, anthropocentrism, or the human hierarchy or human exceptionalism, I think is part of many religions in the world. And it is true, technically speaking, in Buddhist doctrine, it's far superior to be born as a human than an animal. And that that animals are not able of attaining Buddhahood, basically, in their life as an animal. I mean, there are some story literature about that, but generally the idea, you need to be a human being. And so there is a sense that if you have good karma, you'll be born as a human being. To be born as an animal is bad karma in general. And yet, it's a very complicated picture to put together Buddhist views on animals. The other side of it is that Buddhists have enormous compassion for all sentient beings without exception. And in some ways, you mentioned Mary Midgley. If you think of Peter Singer and his whole idea about, suffering, I mean, Buddhists would completely agree that there's no difference in the suffering between, a little bug and a human being when it comes to pain and suffering. And so the compassion that one feels and the sadness and the sorrow and the desire to help them, which is a very important part of compassion, is very, very strong. So it's a strange balance. But historically in the world, I definitely believe that not only, in Buddhist countries and in human history, I think in general, humans have taken the kind of, presupposition that they can just simply make use of animals and hunt them freely and use them as, laborers and, abuse them in all kinds of ways, is partially out of the thought that, well, humans are more important. And, and then many philosophers in the West in particular, just amazingly, have actually argued, including Descartes, that animals are like machines and they don't have feelings at all and they don't feel anything and therefore it's okay. And so those issues are still very strong. I mean, today we're in a time of what's being called post-humanism, which is a recognition that this human centrism and the whole way that we privilege humans as being superior has really, doesn't seem to be doing very well as a steward of this planet. And we really have gone down a wrong path, and we really need to put ourselves back into balance. And one of them is, of course, our relationship with animals. But I feel that the human superiority over animals is so ingrained in us that even people like myself who feel very strongly about this, very hard to change a habit, because it's I think very, very deeply and profoundly assumed as a privilege that humans can take, the prerogative. That's the word I was looking.
I think it's so ironic because we are animals. We are among them. And the fact that, as you say, with Descartes and the Enlightenment, the fact that we severed that knowledge of the interconnectedness, I think is such hubris.
It is hubris. It is hubris. It's complicated. And as I say, so in Buddhism, you see it as well. It's not the case that the category of human and animal was invented by the Enlightenment West. Human versus animal is a very well-known category. I mean, as the example in Buddhism, it has it too. All the other animals and the humans are this, and all the other animals are that.
And we're only seeing them through our lens. So we don't know what dolphin communication is, or elephants are, or cats, as you know.
Well, that's the question. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to raise. First of all, I call that into question, and I'm not sure. I'm taking a lot of Buddhism into this project, but one part of the Buddhism I'm not taking is I don't necessarily buy that animals are inferior morally than humans. I really don't. And whatever my notion of enlightenment is, I'm not 100% sure it's animals don't have access to that. So so that's part of what this is. But Terry, when you say that we don't know what a dolphin is feeling because we're human, that's what I'm challenging. I don't think that that's a kind of speciesism to think that we are so bounded by our human framework that we can't think outside of it. And I think that's simply wrong, that we can. We have lots of access, not 100%, So it's not a question of no access versus 100%. We have, nonetheless, in the middle, we have a lot of access. We have a lot in common with.
I would love for one day.
What?
I would love for one day to smell like a dog, you know, or I would like for one day to see
do it.
the view of a dragonfly. I mean, I'm talking about the different umvelts, but I appreciate what you're saying, you know. What's given you evidence that you can perceive what your cats are experiencing, for example?
Well, because the communication works, for one thing. You know, we communicate with each other quite well. We understand each other quite well. Not perfectly, of course. And often, as you well know, cats refuse to, they do understand what you're saying, but they just choose to ignore you because they don't want to do that. But, you know, so I understand, but I know what they're asking me, and they know what I'm telling them, and they know all kinds of things, and we know that it works. And also the joy that we feel. So how are we doing for time? It's Terry and I could speak for 20 hours.
I know. You have 2 clips that are wonderful. I think our audience would love to see them.
Okay, so 2 clips which demonstrate the sort of thing that I'm trying to build off of. So coming out of this Buddhist perspective and compassion and trying to cultivate our awareness and our appreciation of animals as at least that's a starting point, out of which we may build then an ethics of care for them, and it might even mean changing our behavior. But at the beginning, and what we need to do, not necessarily at the beginning, but at the bottom of it, is we need to just increase more and more our love of animals and our ability, in fact, to communicate with them and to hear what they're saying and to understand them. You know, again, not perfectly, but that doesn't mean not at all. So anyway, here's a first video, which is of just to, first of all, the bottom line for me, which is where I'm coming from, is how much I love animals and how much joy I get from them. And all of us who, no, not this one, the other one, the YouTube one. How much pleasure we share. So it's part of a virtue of being able to overlap in our subjectivities and to feel what they're feeling and to be close with them and to be with them. So this is a video which is available online, and you can see this from many parts of the world. Don't start it yet. In which cows, who are kept in barns over the winter in cold places, will then be, let out into the pasture in the early spring. And this is something that happens in North America, it happens in Northern Europe, and I'm sure in other parts of the world as well. And here you see a bunch of local people, this is some farm in the Midwest in the United States, who know about this event, the first time that the cows are let out each year to go outside and be in the pasture. And lots of people come to this just out of knowing what it's going to be like, which is mainly the pleasure and the joy of seeing how the cows react when they first realize that they've been let outside and they're in the pasture. And basically seeing the joy that they are experiencing, and then noticing how much we as viewers, so the people who are there and we as watching this, how pleasurable it is just to see these cows, who are basically celebrating. Okay, we can play this. Listen. Here they come. Here they come. Look at them. They're like jumping in the air. They're all doing it one by one. They're literally jumping in the air they're celebrating. They are celebrating. And each one, as they realize this, anyway, watch this. There's this baby cow and his mother. Look at it, the way it's prancing with his tail. He looks like a dog. Oh, okay, we can stop this now. We can stop.
Love that.
Yeah. And you can hear the people who are there squealing and laughing with joy. And just to question, why do we take so much pleasure in watching that? I think we feel the joy with the cow. We can identify it. We have some sense of what it's feeling. And it shows how much we love them. And then also how much they themselves are able to enjoy. Okay, and here's my second video, which is something that I'm just very much of an apprentice, to use Alexis Gumb's wonderful language. I'm an apprentice to my cats. And even though I've had my cats for a very long time, I'm still learning from them. But I noticed that this cat will gesture to me as a way of telling me to follow him. And he also does it to our other cat. So it's not a cat human thing. He does it to our cat. But one day he did it to me. So I videotaped him. He was just across the street. He jumps on the car of a neighbor across the street, and you'll see him 4 times. He gestures with his head in which he's telling me to follow him. And he's trying to lead me with the gesture of his head forward. So you'll see it 4 times. Okay. Here he goes. Not yet. There he goes. 1, 2. 3. Here he goes. 4. The silly cat thought that I could jump on the car with him, you know, and just like be with him, which of course I was not able to do. Okay, we can stop this as well.
Those are so wonderful. And I see your point, you know, that yes, we can see through our own lens, you know, what they are communicating. I'm wondering, Janet, given your practices in Buddhism, both theoretically and personally, what practices are you developing to enhance and deepen our relationships with other species, with other animals?
Well, so I am drawing on Buddhism a lot for practices of meditation. So meditation is an amazing, quote unquote, technology whereby we can shift our perception and work with our attention and work with our understanding and our interpretation to actually change the way that we experience things intentionally, but also based on watching what's around us. And so a basic practice is just simply paying more attention, watching, being with animals, being aware of them, whether you have a pet or whether you go out into the countryside or whether you're looking at birds and squirrels outside your house or whether you're living in the jungle or wherever. And also in our imagination to be thinking about them. And also, as you can see, even on the internet, like there's amazing resources of animals, but simply spending time being with them and cultivating more of an awareness, just simply not forgetting about them, I feel is a number one practice.
One of the things that I've learned from you in our conversations is the idea, the word of aleatory, of creating an aleatory relationship with animals. Can you define that and talk about that?
Yeah, thank you for prompting me. That's another, so the word aleatory means sort of kind of by chance. And it connects to a Buddhist concept also of interdependent origination. So what this is about, just to back up for a moment, my project is both to enhance our appreciation of animals so we see them more and we know their value, we see how wonderful they are, and we value them so that we will start to care for them more and we will have more responsibility towards them and we will actually take actions to help them. But the second side of it, so that's one side. The second side of it is that we learn from animals. Our own life will be enhanced just simply by learning the many beautiful and wonderful things about animals. And one of the things that I notice about animals is that they operate more by happenstance, by chance. They don't think, I mean, not all the time, this is not always true, but at least when they're going around their daily business, they're open to different things happening and not necessarily governed by plans, beforehand plans, but open to things as they emerge spontaneously. So animals live in the present very much. Again, animals do plan, don't get me wrong. They go on marches, they migrate, you know, they build nests, they do things, but there's a way in which they do that within a present. So I'm exploring that. But to be in the present is to be open to the aleatory. So the aleatory is what happens spontaneously and maybe outside of your game plan, but as it comes to you, you can make use of it and keep changing. It's kind of connects to what, artists in the 20th century have been talking about with improvisation or spontaneity. And using that as a source of knowledge, as opposed to, again, thinking of everything in a very linear fashion, and also in a very planning beforehand and then carrying out a plan, rather than responding to things as they shift. And I feel that when you watch animals, they're masters of that.
So I'm so interested in what you're saying about presence and improvisation. And yet you also talk in very deep ways about memory. And what's the relationship between memory and mindfulness and presence?
So it depends what you mean by the word memory. There's different kinds of memory. And this has been a discussion in Western philosophy a lot. Memory, like chronological memory of the past. And there's also another type of memory, which is more like embedded in our bodies. It does come from the past, but it's experienced in the present. It's not experienced as something that we remember as past per se. And
do you think animals have memory?
Oh, absolutely, they have memory. I mean, of course, they have a huge amount. They know where they are. They recognize people all the time. They know where they live. They have excellent memories, actually.
Because I think
obviously
about that with presence. I think, does my cat remember being on a plane and that was torturous? I mean, I feel guilty about that. Or are they so in the present that they've moved beyond? I mean, I
don't think
in that way.
they don't think it's that important, once they're over it. So what you remember and what you don't remember, first of all, we're talking about conscious memory versus bodily memory, and those are two different things. But what you remember depends on how attentive you are in the present, but also what's important to you. So, I think that cats and animals, they don't hold on to stuff obsessively the way we do. When it's not important, when the plane trip's over, it's over. Okay, your cat may recognize when you go back again. In fact, Terry Tempest Williams just traveled with her cat recently, which is why she's asking me this question, on a plane from one coast to another. But they do have memory like that, but it's different than humans. But they certainly go back to the same, fish go to the same mating place every year. I mean, animals, navigate the planet, for God's sakes. They know far better than we do where things are.
And I think about animals in the wild. Doug talks about grizzlies, and he is convinced through his studies when he was working on a fire lookout and the decades that he's known particular bears, and he's convinced that they know him as well.
Who's that?
Again, Doug Peacock, who has worked on the grizzlies in Yellowstone and Montana.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about that, in terms of what you're saying. And then your idea of memory and commemoration of memory. Can you talk about that a bit in terms of animals, domestic and wild?
I mean, that's a very deep and profound topic that I haven't thought so much about. I mean, I do think that when we see native peoples who have totem animals and who are doing certain kinds of dances and rituals connecting with animals and animal totem figures, that's a kind of commemoration, which is a very beautiful and amazing thing. It's not something that we modern human beings do very much, but maybe we do with like our pets or so on. But if you're asking whether animals commemorate, that merges into the whole question of instinct. So there's so many fascinating issues with this whole thing, but that which is so embedded in our bones that we keep repeating it as a way of keeping it alive. When a bird is singing a song and he keeps singing the same song over and over again, is that bird like commemorating something that has been learned through the generations?
Or the sparrow in the boreal forests in Canada changing their song. You
Well,
know,
that too,
what
right.
are they adapting to? What are they communicating? I wonder about that. Or I think about with Great Salt Lake, now a rivulet, 60% of what it once was. What are the birds communicating? How are the birds commemorating that body of water now that they can no longer access it in the ways that they have? I mean, as you say, so many questions, and I keep thinking, when a thrush is singing between intervals of thunder, that feels like a conscious choice. Again, as a writer with metaphor, I think, as you say, we have so much to learn from them.
So much to learn. And we have to learn how to listen. We have to know how to be quiet. And we have these amazing people like Doug Peacock and quite a number of others, and Barry Lopez, as you know, and many others who have lived, and Barbara Smutkins, and others who have, lived with animals and observed them. But we're just at the very beginning of this science, as but scientists are realizing how incredibly complex animals are and how much intelligence they have, and intelligence that's very different than kinds of intelligence that we have.
And I think of Carl Safina's work. And
oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I would encourage our listeners, to really look at this literature because it's so rich. And as you have taught me, Janet, that as our compassion toward animals increases through your practices of attentiveness and presence and improvisation, our relationships with each other deepen.
I hope so.
And I'm wondering, how do these ideas connect with climate chaos and climate collapse? Why does this matter? How do these knit themselves together?
Well, there's concrete ways that it connects, to the extent that factory farming and the whole animal agricultural industry, which is horrendous and horrible and pathetic and a holocaust, is connected directly to climate change. So the way that we are treating animals today is directly connected to climate issues in many, many ways, much more than I can list right now. So that's in one way. And so there's just no argument about that. But I also think that as a way of a phenomenology of living, of the way we live on the planet, which hopefully would be less greedy and less self-centered and more in tune with, just to say, in tune with nature and in tune with our place, our relative place and our relative importance, means that we will be more responsible living on the planet just in general. So being aware of animals includes eventually being aware of the animal plant life also, and of the mineral life and these cycles, and of course and our resources and our use of resources, and what human beings, how human beings should be spending their time. Should we be spending our time going on a snow, like on a moonshot, in a rocket, or going across some snowfield in some motorized vehicle, or should we be sitting quietly in our yards, passing our days, kind of cultivating our relationship with the nature around us? I think we're going to have really huge conversations about changing our lifestyle entirely.
And I think that brings up our diet, of that kind of commitment. And
absolutely.
And as you say, patterns die hard, I mean, Janet, what kind of future do you envision? I see you as a visionary, grounded in presence as well as an understanding of past and future, memory, and dreaming. What does your future look like with an aleatory mind?
It depends on, am I being aspirational or am I being pessimistic? I personally see really dark and deep troubles ahead for us. But to the extent that communities will survive and ecosystems on the planet will survive, I would like to see a future where we live very locally and very much, in some kind of mutually beneficial relationship with the animal life and the plant life around us, and that we use our modern science and our modern knowledge as ways to think of really, green and mutually, dependent and beneficial ways of living. I see it very much in terms of small communities, and where practices of animal husbandry and animal raising are very, very self-conscious, how we relate with animals in the wild and what relationships we kind of maintain, and what ways we're careful to make sure that there is a wild, that, that humans don't control every piece of the surface of the planet and so on. So, so many conversations to be had about these things, I feel.
And I feel like, the accommodations we need to make for the wild creatures. I know in the Tetons, there are certain areas now that are bear only, where humans have said, we know this is where they are, and we are honoring that, and therefore the trails are being closed. And I think about, what are these accommodations? Also overpasses.
Yeah.
And, what I hear from you tonight talking about is that this is a responsive world with responsive consciousnesses. What is it? Consciousness. And that your practices help us to be more present with the life around us. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. That's fair to say. I hope so. I do want to stress the issue of our consumption, as you just mentioned, with the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, how we use animal products, and all of those things are very much all connected. Absolutely. But it is based, and it is a very Buddhist idea, that being located in the present, where you're seeing what's really around you and looking, without filters at the implications of what you're doing and what the impact is of what you're doing, and taking responsibility for it, and being accountable are all very much, parts of the thing that I feel are important to cultivate. I'm trying to write about and trying to visualize what they look like.
And that idea of practice, I really appreciate that, because it's both aspirational, as you say, and difficult. And so I keep thinking, these are practices, practices of being present, practices of compassion, practices of being attentive to other species, so that we can come back to our own with a greater sense of wholeness.
Yeah, it's very difficult, but on the other hand, that's why I'm also suggesting that we make that we pay lots of attention to the joy part of it, and the pleasure and the happiness too, of, simply by making animal friends, living with animals, having pets. And actually, by the way, I feel that Americans in particular need to have better knowledge about how to take care of pets, and how to allow the pets a certain amount of freedom of their own and autonomy, and but live together with them, and find ways that, it's not just you kind of keeping this private pet, but you cultivating a relationship with another animal, that you have a kind of somewhat of a reciprocal relationship, and finding ways to do that. There's so much about pet keeping, which animals that people should have as pets, and which they should not. There's another huge problem of people trying to get tigers and lions and all kinds of things in their house, which is absolutely horrible, and so on.
I was thinking about celebratory experiences with animals, and we've had so much water, rain in the desert just in this last month. I had been home for 2 months. I hardly recognized it. And the first thing I noticed is that the meadowlarks were rejoicing. The meadowlarks were singing their songs of spring, which is so much about joy. And they're quieter in the summer with the heat. But it's like, not only had the plants come alive, but so had the meadowlarks come alive. Yep. And I had to believe that they were paying attention to that shift.
I'm sure they were. I love to hear that sound.
I know. Janet, I love you. I so appreciate what you have brought to us. And I'm so excited to bring Stephanie Paulsell to us now. in terms of her response, and also to deepen the conversation. For the past 2 years, what I want our audience to know is that Stephanie Paulsell served as the interim Pusey minister at the Memorial Church during this historic, difficult liminal time, when her eloquent guidance touched each of us who sought her weekly wisdom from our homes. And it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Stephanie, a woman I revere. She's the Susan Shallcross Schwartz Professor of the Practice of Christian Studies at the Harvard Divinity School, and the faculty dean with her husband at Eliot House at Harvard College. She's a beloved professor whose work focuses on religion and literature, Christian spirituality, and spiritually formative dimensions of the practices of reading and writing. She's a theologian who sees the world whole and holy. Her books include Religion Around Virginia Woolf, which I highly recommend, Goodness in the Literary Imagination, co-written with David Carrasso and Mara Willard, Lamentations in the Song of Songs, Honoring the Body, Meditations on a Christian Practice and the Scope of Our Art, the Vocation of the Theological Teacher. Stephanie, welcome. I can't wait to hear your response and to listen to both of you.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you for these amazing evenings. I look forward to each one of them. And it's a real honor to be here with Janet Gyatso. We started teaching at HDS the very same year, 2001, which was also a year of incredible change. And Janet has been one of the biggest influences on how I understand what we're doing at HDS. Early on in our time at HDS, Janet gave a convocation talk that I still assign to students whenever I have the chance and reread it periodically, in which she stood out under a tent on the Francis Avenue side of what is now Swartz Hall and spoke to us about a vision for the divinity school that was not yet, but that could be, in which Buddhist students and Christian students and Jewish students and Muslim students and Buddhist students, students from many different religious traditions studied together, not only the study of religion, but prepared for some kind of religious leadership together, prepared for ministry together. And she's been a huge inspiration in thinking about how we educate future religious leaders at HDS, to me and to many other people. She came to us from Amherst College, where she taught in area studies, and she'd never had an MDiv student before, and she just got interested in it and began leading these wonderful seminars on ministry and Buddhism, which students flocked to, and not just Buddhist students, but many students from many different traditions flocked to these seminars. And out of them, the Buddhist ministry program developed, just from Janet's intellectual curiosity and her passion and commitment to it. And I feel like now she's on this new path of commitment and passion in relation to animals. And it's just so inspiring and exciting to hear about. So it's an honor, Janet, to be in conversation with you tonight. The first thing I want to ask you is, what's the book that you want to write on this?
You mean what's going to be in the book?
Yeah.
I don't have a title yet. I have it. So I have it 3 chapters. The first chapter is about being with. So it's sort of a phenomenology of how animals be with each other. I'm very captivated by just the present, the idea when, mammals or also birds, stay close by each other, how they sit with each other, how animals just abide and live and be with each other, and the whole category of being with another. I'm trying to unpack what's involved in that, and both noticing it in animals and then cultivating it myself as well, what it means for humans to be in that way as well. And the second chapter is really about ways of knowing. Is just what Terry was bringing up. about memory and about how do animals know if they, are there other kinds of knowledge than strictly speaking, representational knowledge of the past. So that would be like historical knowledge, or when you're actually talking about and representing the past as opposed to embodying it, and trying to break down that difference. I mean, the project is very much, I'll say, influenced by contemporary philosophers, like people like Merleau-Ponty as one obvious example, and others. But it's about ways of knowing, and it's about that aleatory way of knowing that Terry was talking about as well, and different kinds of ways that knowledge may be both registered, and then how we emotionally act on that knowledge. And then the third chapter, I'm trying to actually work out practices of, it's kind of like a meditation practice, but one very, it's not going to be instructions per se, but I will be talking about the principles of it. But, one very obvious thing that someone like me could do in my life is just spend, instead of sitting in meditation for a half an hour every morning, spend a half an hour just sitting with my cats, just following them around, not intervening or interfering, but just being with them and watching them.
Oh, well, yeah.
And also using mantras. So that's, so various kinds of practices and how they might work. Because I'm interested not only in developing this sort of sentiment, but also how to make it really have traction in our ethical commitments.
Yeah. What can I ask? What kind of mantras are they? And
well,
they draw on more than human language.
Well, I mean, the basic mantra would be the basic Buddhist mantra of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hum, which, my Tibetan teachers, when I would take a walk with them, so imagine me, in my early 20s and an 80-year-old teacher taking a walk, and the teacher constantly, every time they would see a animal of some sort, saying Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the mantra of compassion. It's just when you're, actually, there is a picture. So Navidra, can you show us that photo, that picture that we were going to do at the beginning? So the Bodhisattva of Compassion is Avalokiteshvara. And then there's also Tara. Is Navidra there? Maybe Navidra's not there. Anyway, never mind. But the audience will know about Tara or Avalokiteshvara. So mantras are already in existence, mantras of compassion. But one can also construct your own mantra in a certain sense of very pithy statements that you keep repeating to yourself or thinking to yourself. It's a little tricky to do that. So I think we should use the already established mantras. But mantra is a very powerful tool to focus and transform your mind. So you use it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I've heard you talk to your cats and to my cats. The language, it's not quite it's not the language that we speak to each other. And so I wondered if you were drawing on the language of animals for mantras.
Well, okay, so Stephanie knows me personally very well. And a part that I don't dare to talk with anybody about, but I have a whole way of talking to animals, which is getting more and more intense and weird the older that I get. That's not the mantra, that's a different thing.
All right, just checking. So you're talking about the second chapter, the ways of knowing. And one of the things that, strikes me in seeing those wonderful videos and hearing you talk about them is that you're using your humanness to build a bridge to the animal, right? You also know what it feels like for spring to come and to be excited enough to jump. And so you see the cows jump and you think, okay, that's joy. Or, you also have the experience of saying to a friend, come on, follow me.
Right, exactly.
And you look at your cat and you recognize that, you see that. And I guess I have two, I love that. And I loved those videos and found them very convincing. I wonder if there are people who would say that that is a kind of speciesism, that it's a human reading of animals, and just like what you say, what your response is to that. And secondly, I'm wondering what the bridge is to animals that are really not like us, like to a snake or a toad or something that's not, not a mammal, not furry, not warm, not whose expressions don't remind us of our expressions? How do we build the bridge to them?
Yeah, well, thank you, Stephanie. Those are both questions that have come up actually a lot in animal studies recently. And the first thing is, I don't actually agree that we're using our humanness to connect to the joy of the cow. I think when we connect to the joy of the cow, we're not being human. We're precisely being animals with the cow. We're connecting at a deeper and more basic level that is not appropriately labeled human. So the desire for warmth, the desire for sleep, the desire to play, the act of playing, to eat, to stretch your limbs, to smell the air. These are all things that we do, that animals do, that when we do, not everything that we do is defined by humanness. And that's the speciesism, is to claim that it is. And to refuse that not everything about me is human. And so that's number one. And that's what my first chapter is about, is all these things that we share deeply with animals, and are you going to tell me that human warmth is different than cat warmth or human sleep? Yeah, of course, our sleeping patterns are somewhat different, but I mean, that's just, splitting hairs kind of thing. And again, it's not that we know exactly what they're feeling. We also don't know exactly what each other are feeling. We're two human beings. If I have a twin sister, I don't know exactly what she's feeling. But then the second question of how do we connect to animals that are very different than us? So there's a famous essay by Thomas Nagel, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? But you could go further than it. And so he was talking about echolocation, and, that's how they, instead of using their vision, they use a lot of echolocation. Turns out that, human beings, actually, if you're blind, you use echolocation also, and it's something that you can develop. And if you work on it, you can get a lot better at it. But, an octopus, so this famous film of, My Teacher, the Octopus, I've been with Tibetan teachers where they look at a little shrimp, so that if you have some movie of, under the ocean, and you see these little tiny shrimp or clams, a clam is swimming along and it's like beating, it's like its two sides of the valves of its shell, and some predator is chasing it. And you can see in the motion of the shells, the way that it's clapping, that it's frightened and it's running away and it's trying to preserve its life. That's Dalai Lama teaches a lot about this. Everybody wants to stay alive. Everybody wants to be happy. You can, if you look at that clam, we have nothing in common with that, guy, a clam, but you can see it. You can see the fear. And I don't think that's projecting. Projecting to claim that it is indeed it's a very cynical response. It's to say that we're trapped in our humanness. It's to decide the question in advance, that no matter what we say, oh, but I'm just a human, so obviously I just said it as a human. That's a philosophical trap.
Yeah.
That I think we have to resist.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think when I said you're building a bridge from your humanness, I guess I meant you're building a bridge from things that you recognize in yourself.
Exactly.
But that does not necessarily mean that it's defined by being human, which kind of leads me to my next question, which you and Terry were just talking about, the similarities between, the kind of existence that you were calling for, which is going to require or would require a radical reordering of how we live and a transformation of ourselves. And so you're reaching in that toward, a powerful religious and philosophical tradition that has practices that are transformative, through which we can be transformed. And of course, the other place humans go to be transformed is to education. And I was wondering how your study of animals and your commitment to these questions and to exploring them on this very phenomenological level, how that has changed your understanding of what the humanities are or what the humanities ought to be.
Well, thank you that's such a wonderful question, and I appreciate it very much. And it is true. I've been teaching this material. I'm presently teaching the third time that I've taught the class on these issues. And I use a phrase that actually I have to credit Charles Halsey, who happens to be my husband, this term of educating the emotions,
Mm,
which is a kind of education.
yeah.
And educating the attention, educating, processes of reasoning, um, and educating our powers of vision, of seeing, of noticing, and of tying our moral, especially our moral emotions and our feeling, and indeed our feelings of love and compassion for others.
Yeah.
And I'll say that I'm even, I started teaching this before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, it just feels to me that certainly in the study of religion, but I would say I would want it to be true for literature and for philosophy and history and all the humanities. We need to be paying attention to what's really, really important for this current moment of, profound crisis and danger. And so that humanities, well, all of the disciplines, all of academia, but you asked me about the humanities, I think are obliged to direct their attention towards these matters. And I think in the humanities is, you can just say it's to teach you how to be human, where my definition of how to be human is to learn how to appreciate also what's beyond the human and who we're in companionship with, who we're being with on the planet. That's my phrase, being with, and we're being with animals, and how to do that better, and how to learn how to be well with animals in ways that, are going to satisfy our highest aspirations of what's good and what's happy and what's the best and things like that.
Thank you. That's a really rich answer. Terry had asked you if I guess her question had been, in Buddhism, is there a hierarchy between non-human animals and human animals? And you said there is, but there are also these other resources within Buddhism that could undercut that, could transform even that. And I'm wondering, what about the rest of life, plant life and the life of the planet, and where does that fit in with human and non-human animals?
So this is not so much coming from Buddhism, which doesn't have a tradition of thinking of plants as sentient, although Jainism does. So Jainism is the major world religion that does think of plants and has a, highly detailed idea about that. But it seems to me that modern science is very quickly, there's enormous and amazing research that's happening about how plants communicate with each other and how plants are attuned to what's going on in the planet. And it kind of looks like intelligence. I mean, it is a very, very different kind of intelligence. Those guys are alive, and those guys are reaching for things, and those guys, and so it's continuous. And as we know from modern science, the line between plants and animals, just like the line between animals and humans, it's a porous line. So it absolutely connects with that as well. But, if one generalizes something that one's doing too much, then it becomes too general and too vague. So, I'd like to start with those creatures at the minimum who are closest to us, who we recognize, when we all love those cows. I think, I know that not everybody loves those cows, but I think most people love those cows. You can't help but be happy when you see them,
Yeah. What about the law? Is that part of your
What?
the law?
Oh yeah.
There've been attempts to get legal protections for animals, and especially animals that are understood to be the most like us, right? And is that part of your research and part of the project that you're working on?
No, it's not. It's not what I'm working on. Although in my teaching, I've been fortunate to have students from the law school take the class, and there are at Harvard has an animal law program, actually, and I've had some wonderful students, and students who are in law very much want to draw on their own ethical and human resources in order to develop this. So I'm all in favor of it. It's just that that's just not like my style. So I'm not, but I think it certainly connects to that. And I'm hoping, again, by cultivating our sensibilities, we will be motivated to pass laws to protect animals, and such laws have been passing. Depends on which administration it is, because they lift certain things against the industries and so on and so forth. But, in Europe, they're far more advanced than we are. In places like the UK is much more advanced than the United States in terms of animal protections and stuff like that. But still, it's, that's one of the most important things. But, again, the idea that we'll be motivated to, to have those, legal innovation to think them through and to make them happen and to fight the political fight that needs to be had and so on. It's complicated, connected with the industry and connected with people's consumption desires as well. And, if indeed we would stop wearing fur coats and stop and use vegan shoes and try to cut our meat consumption down dramatically, and use plant-based protein and stuff like that, then it wouldn't be such a hard battle to protect animal rights, from the legal perspective too.
Yeah. I feel like you've been interested in these questions long before you started writing about them and thinking about them. You've been interested in them for a long time. And I was wondering if there were any stories you could tell us of what, were there moments where you thought, oh, this is a whole intellectual realm of study for me. This fits into the study of religion. It fits in the humanities. Were there moments where you had an experience where you thought, this is where my work has got to go?
Yeah. You're right. So I've been thinking about the issues forever. I didn't realize I was thinking about them. It's just that's just the where my mind goes all the time. And, I'm well known amongst my friends, like if we're sitting around watching TV together and a commercial comes on and it's a little baby and Pampers and a mother, and there happens to be a little puppy in the film, I'll start gushing over the puppy and totally ignore and don't even realize that there's a cute baby there as well. So, that's just the way that I've been thinking all the time. But it's a good question. I don't know exactly how this started. I did have a couple of moments of revelation and a prophetic voice inside my head, which is something that has happened to me at major crossroads in my life, where somebody was telling me, Janet, write this book. I want, you do this. I felt I know I don't want to sound too woo-wooey, but I did feel something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also at a point in life, where, I sort of feel like I've done most of my big, whatever professional stuff in my actual field that I was trained in. Okay, I've done what I'm supposed to do. And now I can do something that I really want to do. What do I really love? Obvious answer, animals, that's what I really love. So.
Yeah. Well, that's what comes through, I think, is the love that's motivating this project.
Thank you.
I was thinking about in Christian practice, contemporary Christian practice, there seems to me an attempt to try to do what you're describing in some places, to pay more attention to animals. And one of the places is to lift up St. Francis as, and his feast day as a day to bring your animals with you to church and to have your animal blessed and to be blessed by the presence of all of our animal companions in the same room with us, in the sort of the ritual space with us. And I've only been to a few of these services at First Church in Cambridge, but it is really perspective shifting to hear, the minister refer to these animals as our companions, and that they're here with us, and they're with us in the space that we usually occupy as humans only. And it's really, it's I don't know, it's like, I remember once when I was a kid, I lived on the edge of these woods, and I remember, and there would sometimes be just these huge like web hammocks almost with caterpillars growing in them. And I brought home some stalks of like little flowers once into my room, and I put them in a jar. And when I woke up the next morning, there were caterpillars all over my bed. And it was that similar kind of feeling of, oh, like some boundary has been crossed here, like the outside is inside. And I'm sitting in church with my dog or my cat, and my cat was very ill behaved, I'll just say, in church. But I just wonder if there are other, I don't know, other boundaries that could be crossed that would startle us into a new perspective.
I'm sure I'll think of much more. I thank you for these wonderful questions, Stephanie. And when Terry asked me who should respond, I knew Stephanie is definitely on my side with this whole issue. And, we know each other for a long time, and I know Stephanie's a deep animal lover. Now I'm forgetting what I was going to say. I just lost my train of thought. But
I was asking about just the cross, bringing animals into spaces we don't usually experience them, or, we're not usually with them.
Well, yeah, Terry just mentioned, because of COVID, I took my class outside, and I've been teaching this class outside, and we're blessed at HDS with beautiful fall weather. And we also have beautiful grounds in front of the building where there's places for students sit outside, and we've been having class outside, and so that we don't have to wear masks. And therefore I encouraged one of my students, who's this wonderful student who has a beautiful, wonderful dog, to bring the dog to class. And she only brought him once. So animals are not allowed inside the building, unfortunately. In the past, 20 years ago, you could bring dogs to class. And I know professors who have done that. But it was so much fun. It was not a distraction. I loved having that dog there. And I would break into dog language, like I'm lecturing, and all of a sudden I'd start addressing the dog as well. And I'd like to have like a bunch of dogs there, or cats. Cats don't travel as in the same kind of way, that it would be hard to bring a cat, and stuff like that. But in the classroom, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can tell one story of a great Buddhist teacher who I heard about, Tibetan teacher who went to California. And this is a Tibetan teacher, and one of their sort of styles of ritual consecration that they do for students is a certain ritual in which they make certain sounds, and it transforms your mental state. This is a very esoteric sort of Tibetan kind of ritual. But I heard that this teacher, who was also a great animal lover, at one time instructed all the students to bring their dogs to the temple. And then he told the owners to go away. And so he had just a room with a whole bunch of barking dogs. And this teacher proceeded to give a teaching to the dogs. I wish I could have been there to see how the dogs reacted. But, there's stories, animals loved the Buddha, stories like that sort of thing. And so that's another space. I think the religious space, I want animals with me all the time, I want to be, I want to have a comfort animal with me at all times. That would help me enormously get through my life.
Yeah. Makes me think of St. Francis preaching to the birds.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yeah.
And speaking with the wolf of Gubbio and asking him to please stop eating people up. Yeah, there's lots of stories like that. And
it happens.
Yeah.
Holy people do that. You do form relationships. Holy people are able to see and communicate with them,
Yeah. I know we're getting close to the time when I'm supposed to stop, but I am struck by the resource, when you were talking about Buddhism and the resources within Buddhism for rethinking the hierarchy of humans and non-humans. And I think there are, thinking of Francis and other saints, there are these hidden resources within our traditions. And I thought I might just close with 2 verses from a psalm, which I think is one of those hidden places.
Thank you.
In the Hebrew Bible at least. But as I have read this passage over many, the ashes of many cats in my life. But it's a really beautiful passage. Anyway, I'll just read it. It's from Psalm 36. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your judgments are like the great deep. You save humans and animals alike, O Lord. And I wondered what if we really thought that, the divine cares as much about the destiny of animals as the destiny of humans, what difference that would make. So Janet, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. And Terry, thank you so much for inviting me. And Brian, thank you for the beautiful tea ceremony. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephanie, for wonderful questions. I really appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Janet. I feel like we have been able to witness 2 powerful women over cups of tea. Being with Janet Gyatso is to be inspired and to bear witness to her advocating for practices rooted in Buddhism that induce ethical traction, commemorations, cultivating compassion in a burning world, in a world of uncertainty and climbing chaos. Perhaps it's compassion that is one of the most important spiritual implications of climate change. Changing our habits of knowing, changing our habits of unknowing. And as Stephanie invites us to think about the importance of boundary crossing with other species, respectfully. Believing in a responsive universe, as Mary Evelyn Tucker vows toward. I think about Henry Beston, a fellow New Englander, who wrote this about animals in his book, The Outermost House. Quote, "We need another and a wiser and perhaps a more mystical concept of animals. Remote from universal nature and living by complicated artifice, man in civilization surveys the creature through the glass of his knowledge and sees thereby a feather magnified and the whole image in distortion. We patronize them for their incompleteness, for their tragic fate, for having taken form so far below ourselves. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with the extension of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren. They are not underlings. They are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth." Unquote. Brian Kurbis, in his tea ceremonies that frame these conversations, reminds us that tea is help. Insights and practices into the help of our relationships with all beings, animals, and each other is one of the gifts of tonight's weather report. And the response from Janet Gyatso and Stephanie Paulsell, educating our emotions, seeing our noticing toward an ethical stance toward life. May we continue to cultivate our attention and a deeper responsibility toward more healthy and compassionate relationships with this beautiful broken world, so that all life in its magnificent diversity will flourish. Thank you. Brian?
Sponsors: Harvard Divinity School, the Constellation Project, the Center for the Study of World Religions, Religion and Public Life, Theosophy Teas, and the Planetary Health Alliance.
Copyright 2021, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.